This is Caffeinated Risk, the podcast for security professionals by security professionals. Here are your two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys, Tim McCreate and Doug Leese.
Welcome, folks, to Season 4 of Caffeinated Risk. For our first podcast, we chat with Brian Allen, Senior Vice President, Technology and Cybersecurity Risk Management at the Bank Policy Institute. Brian's career spans over 2 decades, including many years as the Chief Security Officer for Time Warner Cable. He's also consulted at the executive level during his tenure with Ernst & Young and continues teaching the next generation of security professionals through his adjunct professor position at the University of Connecticut School of Business. Brian's latest book, Building a Cyber Risk Management Program, has just been released. It's our opportunity to get some behind-the-scenes details on the book, why it was time to write this book, and the path Brian sees cybersecurity professionals should take to help their organizations become more resilient. And now, let's check out our latest podcast with Brian Allen. Well, thanks so much, Brian, for joining us with Caffeinated Risk. I really appreciate it. It's nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. I love your stuff, and the conversation is always thoughtful.
Well, thank you, sir. No, I appreciate it. And what I'd like to do is, if I can I get you to introduce yourself to our audience and what you're doing today? Because I think it's kind of fascinating, the work that you're doing today.
Sure. So I was a former chief security officer for Time Warner Cable. I think I led that up for, 14 years and did cyber risk and physical and business continuity, crisis management, fraud investigations. We did the intercept work with the government. So big, broad remit. And then I went to EY and was working with boards, general counsels, the C-suite on their cyber oversight obligation that started to develop. And, really kind of fascinating conversations to have access like that, Fortune 100s, a couple Fortune 50s. And so today I work for the Bank Policy Institute, and I'm the SVP of Emerging Technology Risk Management. We represent the largest banks, in front of regulators, legislators, the executive branch, so Intel, CISA, and really try to, shape positions, for the industry and advocate. Lately, I've been spending a tremendous amount of time on AI, as you can imagine, fraud and, new technologies, and really kind of, trying to establish positions for the industry and with the industry and, a lot of collaboration. But AI is phenomenal, and the interaction with the government is great. It's just it's incredibly thoughtful, and the banks are, I feel, second to none in risk management and the space in risk management across industry. So it's a good place to be.
Oh man, that's awesome. And I just want to make sure our listeners also know that you were part of the landslide of information that came on enterprise security risk management with the 3 books that you've helped co-author. And I know we want to talk today a little bit about your latest endeavor, which is building a cyber risk management program, because I think these are some of the things that we really want our folks listening to understand more about the journey you took to get there. And one of the questions I wanted to ask, I know Doug has a bunch too, is what drove it? What was the driving force behind your latest book, Brian? It's for those who don't know, it's building a cyber risk management program. I'm curious where that came from, or where you got the idea to map this one out.
Yeah. So just a quick step back. The reason I went to EY was I wanted to work on my first book, which was, putting risk management in play, right? So we talk about it a lot, but do it at an executive level. And then, while I was at EY, I was on a flight with my wife. We're going on vacation, and like every normal person does, I was reading SEC documents.
Because we all do on the plane.
Right. And just had this, in 2018, the SEC in cyber guidance, made some statements, and they provided this, publicly. And they said to the board, you have to have oversight of a cyber risk management program. And on the plane, I was like, what's a cyber risk management program, right? And they discuss it a little bit, but they don't get into it.
Right.
And so they kind of set the standard of, hey, what is this? And so, started down that path. And that's was the basis of the conversation with boards and executives of, hey, you have an oversight obligation. Let's talk about that. And, when I left EY, my co-author, Brandon Babst, and I mapped out a framework of what is a cyber risk management program. And we basically mapped standards, so ISO 31000, 27001, case law, which I can get into if you want a little bit of how that shaped this, the regulatory environment, and not just the SEC, but other things. And in essence, the whole framework comes down to there are 4 core elements of a cyber risk management program. And by the way, you could take cyber out and put in any risk management program. It's kind of the 4 core elements. Agile governance, right? And not just do you have a committee, but are they governing, right? Is it action? Is it an inaction? 2 is a risk-informed system. And a risk-informed system is demanded by the courts. And I can explain that in a second. And the system is not, hey, are you reporting? It is, do you have a system in place that is granular enough and has enough depth that's appropriate for your environment to establish a risk tolerance? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ways to do it. We don't get into how do you do an assessment and how you do this, but there are, core elements of, do you have a system in place that's repeatable and trusted, right? The courts ask for that. The third is a risk-based execution and strategy. So now that you have a system, how do you budget and execute to that and prioritize and use resources and really the things that CISOs and CSOs do, right? Okay, now I'm executing. But you're executing to a tolerance that's been informed by a system and approved by the governance model. Right. And the last is risk escalation and disclosure. That's not incident response, right? An incident could cause escalation if a risk falls outside of a tolerance. Like if an incident forces a risk outside of a tolerance, then you have to escalate to what and to whom. And that has to be systematic. The basis of those, so we've got 4 core elements, and they are supported by 23 principles. And the principles are all aligned to these standards, case law, right? So not my opinion, right? This is like we've taken authoritative sources, including influential things like the National Association of Corporate Directors and their 5 core principles, right? And so we mapped it and tied it to the whole thing so that it's not this kind of, hey, you have to do these things. It's more of, these are the 4 core elements. Here are your considerations. And by the way, you have an obligation now, use this to help guide you in, what's appropriate for you and your business.
Right.
And the book gets into all of that, right? Like, hey, how do you, what are the principles? And we talk about each of the principles and what does that mean? And how do you, decipher that and what's appropriate for you? But we don't get into, this is how you do risk management.
Excellent book, by the way. And I think that anybody that doesn't read it is going to be missing out, because the foundation seems to be not just, like you say, Brian's opinion, but this is what the law says. This is what the Securities Exchange Commission says. Makes a big difference. And kind of the first thing that came to me was, because you'd mentioned the SEC a few times, you have to disclose enough that a reasonable investor could make a decision, yay or nay, based on that disclosure. But how would somebody maybe a little lower down in the organization help to identify something like that? They're probably not the sophisticated investor that the SEC has in mind, for one. Is it something as simple as X% of revenue, or how would they know, I guess, that this is material enough to report?
Mm. Yeah. It's a great question. The materiality conversation confuses a lot of people, right? Because it's subjective. It's meant to be subjective because everyone's in unique situations. To answer that question, I want to take one step back and talk about kind of the problem. Like when I was at EY and when we were assessing programs, and what we saw is that everybody did risk management ad hoc, right? They had a committee that wasn't necessarily governing. They did risk assessments and they had risk tools and risk registers, all great stuff. They quantify risks, right? All useful things. But they were equating that to that this is risk management. And that's not necessarily true, right? Because you could have gaps, or it's not working right, or the escalation was based on a relationship versus what we're talking about, disclosure and an escalation. So materiality is the big one, right? That has got to escalate. It has got to get to the public. If you're a public company, those are the rules. You have to do that. That is the basis of the SolarWinds case, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then everything security people do is based on risk management. You could be in the weeds of a vulnerability management program. And, your job is, hey, this is vulnerable. We need to fix this. We need to close this gap. We've got to do this. Okay. Why? What's protected? What asset is at risk? Is it critical? We've got 1,000 vulnerabilities. Okay. 998 are on computers that have no data on them that were staged for new employees, no risk. But we've got one or two. They have these, the core assets that would be material if something were to happen. We've got to, and I know we've got to treat those differently, right? I know everybody knows that we've got to treat those differently. But when we talk about the programmatic piece, like why does it have to be programmatic? It's because that this is complex. It's because assets change. It's because valuations change. It's because everybody needs to know their role, not just in the tactical piece that they do, but in the programmatic piece of risk management, of cyber risk management. Yes, you've got a role to play, but what is it serving? Yes, you're protecting, of course, right? But you're also trying to manage the risk management program that in and of itself, it needs to be a program because the regulators are saying that, because there's accountability in that. But here's another reason too, right? As we kind of push into digitalization, companies have to go fast. That's core to digitalization. Mm-hmm. So why do they need to know it, and what's material and what's not is important because we've got obligations. But it also has to be part of, like, the cyber risk management program has to serve all of these pieces too for connection. Otherwise, it feels ad hoc. It is ad hoc. It has served us in the past, but it doesn't serve us anymore. And a lot of that is because digitalization is speeding risk.
Right.
That's not a bad thing. We can't be focused on protection. And I know people have heard this 1,000 times. But from an executive standpoint, in the 70s, the average lifespan of a company in the S&P was about 35 years. Today, it's getting to be about 15 years. So from an executive standpoint, right, they're like, oh, I've got cyber risk, but you know what else I have? Competition.
Yeah.
That's a bigger risk right now, right? So I got to go fast. So help me go fast. And so the reason to understand material risks and those things is that, yes, you got to do that. And that serves this SEC obligation, but there's a bigger picture here. And that is that we don't have to protect everything. And so how do we do that? That's trusted, that's repeatable, that's not ad hoc, right? That has served us in the past. It's all those core things that eventually that go into and why that programmatic piece helps serve, not just, hey, why do we do asset identification? Mm-hmm. But get us back into the risk management component and let that be the absolute driver.
How do you then balance a risk-informed decision system? And we've talked about this before in the past, right? When we've dealt with the ESRM, so that they actually understand this concept that we're informing the decision based on risks that we have identified. But how do you get that message across to the enterprise, right? How do you make that important cultural shift so that it isn't just where we were before with information security? Things have changed now because of digitalization and the advancements of AI and ML and others.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges is that the executives don't quite know what their role is with security, right? And a lot of that is our fault. Are we communicating the right things? And, the ESRM book, really the premise is, what is the role of security? The role of security is to guide a business through a security risk decision-making process, right? That's the role of security. And then we protect, and then we get assigned. Then you've got to be ready to respond and do investigations and all these things, right? But the initial role is to guide you so that you're informed to make a more informed strategic decision that is inclusive of risk issues, right? And then and then what is your tolerance here, right? And I'll budget to that, and we'll execute to that. Mm-hmm. That has worked in the past, right? But now, why does it need to be programmatic? And I think it's speed. So this risk-informed system, isn't necessarily about the output. Hey, this is your tolerance. Right. It is really about getting to the governance body, right? And saying, hey, governance body. And a lot of arguments we hear, like from people, hey, we already do this. They have an information security committee. Good.
Yep.
They governing, right? And so what does that mean? Are they making decisions on tolerance? Okay, what is the scope of the decision that we want them to make? Like the scope, is it just information? Is it information engineering? Is it all products? Is it everything operational that's touched on by digital? That's a different thing. Okay, now what's the granularity you want us to go down? Which, by the way, needs resources and skill sets. And the value, and so this programmatic piece is, in order to get to a tolerance, which you could do a number of ways through KRIs, like through thresholding KRIs, or through maturity and tying risk to maturity. So it's the communication to the governance body and the business. Hey, this is the system we want to put in place. Here's your role. This is my role. Are you good with this? And the argument against it is, I don't want to be more educated to make a risk decision, right? That's the argument against this. It's not a good one, but we have to be in a place to communicate that and to bring them to the table. And, the SolarWinds case has an opportunity to be great for this industry because, when I was at EY and we were talking with the businesses, the executives about this, they were the owners of this program, right? Because the SEC, they're the owners. That's the board. You're the board secretary. You're the general counsel. You're the CRO. You're the audit committee. You own this. Now, the SolarWinds has made security part ownership because the output, right, of not being transparent enough and disclosing material risks, the output of a cyber risk management program, one of them, wasn't met. I think now we've got opportunity, right, to go and to talk with businesses in a different way. Look, you have this obligation. I have this obligation. Let's talk what this means. And that's the fundamentals of this framework. It doesn't tell you what to do, how to do it. Right. It's just a basis of considerations to say, you have this obligation to now get to a program. A risk-informed system is part of that. Right. So it's not just metrics and quantification. It is about how do we set up, at what context and approach to build a tolerance, because that's going to inform me and the rest of the business on what we need to execute to. And I don't think the executives understand the role of security. The role is to set that up. They own it. They own a big part of this. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But did they know their role here? And without them knowing our role, we're pushing this kind of boulder uphill. But that's where the SolarWinds case, I think, comes into play, because it kind of brought to everybody's attention, the CISO was singled out. I don't know why. The reasoning in there could have applied to the CIO, the general counsel, the CFO, right? And the law firms that I've talked with, they know this, and they're communicating this to executives. But the point is, we have this kind of collective opportunity to change fundamentally how security operates with bringing their understanding along. I think that's probably the biggest hurdle that we have.
I agree. I think so. If for folks, right, if you have not had a chance to review the filing by the SEC against the CISO, et cetera, you should. It's 67 pages of frightening material if you're a security professional, because to me, it was almost a what not to do. And how not to operate a program. And it was actually hard to read in some spaces, because I think all of us, I don't know about you, Brian, but I've sat in those chairs where you've had that type of response from executives, like, no, you don't understand, right? We need to actually do something. And it's unfortunate that we had to get to this space where it's such a publicly known incident now that it's going to be judged in a court, probably, as opposed to somewhere else. But I think you're right in many ways that there's an opportunity for all of us to learn from this, to take a look at what you're proposing within this cyber risk management program, the frameworks we should be having in place. But I'm with you. I think, you're right. My biggest fear is the executives not wanting to understand, dig deep, or accept that it's just going to be the CIO or the CISO have to deal with it. We're okay, right? You just come back to us when things are better. Or if you don't report to us, then that must mean everything's good. That's my favorite line. Well, both the last time I talked to Tim, then it must mean things are good, right? Right?
Yeah. I do think we collective, the industry, has to be a bit more, open to things are changing, right? Because I can't tell you the amount of times we've talked to like CISOs on this, and they say, well, go through the 4 core elements. Well, I have a committee, therefore I've got governance. Okay, it's not governing, but okay, let's move on. A risk-informed system. Yeah, I report to the board every quarter. lots of metrics, right? Doesn't really establish tolerance. We don't talk about scope.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I know everyone's got a strategy as they budget and execute, right? And priorities. I get that. Is it based on a tolerance? Because ultimately it should be, right? Otherwise, what are you protecting and why are you protecting it to that level of protection? And then escalation and disclosure, the response is, well, I have an incident response plan. And each one of those is different than what is called for. Like when you map out, when we started mapping this, we were like, this is mind blowing. This is really neat. Risk management is mature, right? It's a mature practice. It's just, it needs to mature in our space. But in order to do that, we've got to have this kind of reality check with ourselves of, hey, are we doing this right? Is it programmatic? Is it repeatable? And yes, it needs resources and skill sets. And, could you execute this? There are other priorities of protection. It's good, but at some point we've got to transition a little bit into this space, if not a lot of it into this space. One, because you have an obligation, but two, we are seeing budget squeezed. CFOs have, they've got budget tolerances that they're starting to feel. Digitalization, again, going back to that, and speed of business of you can't keep pace with, the world's, we've got to protect this. There's more. Yes, at some point. Yeah. There's no zero risk environment, right? And it's only going to get worse. Like there's going to be more risk. So what is the balance? Whose decision is it? What's the cadence of this conversation? Is all the programmatic piece. And, that needs structure. Right? And it needs approval from the governance body. Hey, do you want to do this? Okay, this is what it takes. Here's the consideration. This is the journey we're going to go down.
Now, is there a way to sell that if you were to get a good program together, you could actually go faster because you wouldn't be debating? You know where your tolerance is.
Yeah. Executives understand this conversation. I loved going into boards, not talking with them about ransomware and all this piece, but understanding, do you know your tolerance? Do you know where you're going? Do you know digitalization is what level of your strategy for the next 5 years? If we could help you be more informed and know what's around the bend before your competitors, you go faster, right? That's a strategic advantage. And business leaders do risk management daily, right? Mm-hmm. A CFO's budget is risk management. How much do we put in security versus research and development versus this, right? There's risk decisions in all of that. And so, become that. The risk management conversation in security is the strategic conversation. And so how strategic do you want to get? How deep is your risk management concepts and nuances and engagement in the business with the risk management conversation, not just the security conversation. And again, I hesitate because inherently security people are risk practitioners, right? It's inherent. And so you're saying, hey, in the response, I got it. I already do that. We could do it better, right? Always. And Tim, as studying risk, you learn every day when you're in the middle of it. It's never ending. It's phenomenal.
But that's the problem, is that you're in the middle of it so often throughout your day, especially in operational roles, that you don't get a chance to step back and look at it, or you don't force yourself to stop and look at it from that more strategic perspective. And Doug brings up a good point, is that if you're able to set the guidelines with your executive and you're able to set the guards on the side of the road, you can go faster. Like you can actually spend the time then talking about where your organization wants to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And then the security team becomes that enablers where we're come on a regular basis and advise them as you're looking at, generative AI, here's things you need to worry about. Bias inside the engine. What's the impact of the LLM if someone can actually poison it? All those wonderful things you could talk about. But right now, I don't know of too many CISOs who get a chance to have conversations like that because, to the point earlier, they're still struggling with just setting things up. Getting past that, we talked about the pen test results, and I need some more money for this. I think we still have a good chunk of folks that are still in that space where they're slugging along operationally and fighting the fires. They're not able to step back and look at it from the value you can bring and what you can do if you put a system like this in place, if you actually have a program and a programmatic approach, not just like to your point, I've established a program. I get these 4 things, check. Any auditor looks at it and goes, absolutely, check. In silo, they look lovely. But together they're shit because they're not together, right? Do you know what I mean? So how do you, this is where I like it's almost like this book should become required reading for a lot of folks coming into the space of CISO, is that if you're trying to create the program and then programmatically run it, two different things, right? So you need to look at the second step, right, to really get good at what you want to do.
Yeah. The first question is, do you have a program, right? What is it? Show me. Can it stand on its own? Does it have a framework? Does it have policies like a vulnerability management program, like an identity access management program, right? Does that stand alone by itself? Because now is the time to build that, right? And that is a different animal than those other programs and your DR program and business continuity, and right? But that is needed. And, your argument of like, hey, I'm busy with these other things, that's a trap, right? Because there's always going to be a new thing, and there's always going to be another threat, and there's always going to be a new business twist, and there's always going to be, and so you have to, right? If you're in that position, now's the time, right? Of spend time on, we don't have to protect everything. And security people are like, well, we've got to, right? And we kind of give this aura that, hey, we're good, we're protecting. Yeah, we're on fire. There's a lot happening. You are not protected, right? There's no zero risk environment. It's not happening. And by the way, businesses don't want one. It's too expensive. It slows things down. Yes, you've got to protect core assets. I get all that. But, the return on the investment is not, you always ask, what's the output of security? And, you get in these, like when I do speaking sessions, people are like, protection. Protection is not, it's the effect of a mitigation plan. That's the output of security is a balance, is a tolerance, right? Because now you're like, hey, working with the business, this is what we want to protect. This is what we're going to get to. Okay. Now we can execute and protect and put mitigation plans and response plans in place and do all those things. The effect of protection is, it's an effect of a mitigation plan. Mm-hmm. But when you become strategic in this space, now the output is information,
right?
Risk information, right? That's your output. And it's not information of statistics. Hey, look at all we're protected. Everything's good. No, the information is risk information. Hey, here's the balance. We're okay. What do you think about this? Are we okay? Do we need now? No, they don't want to accept this much risk. Okay, I need more budget. But it's not, here's this threat, I need more budget, because there's always going to be another threat. And that's where the CFOs start and the board starts getting into this, budget fatigue. New threat, new solution, new threat, new solutions, endless. Versus, do we want to accept this risk, right? And then who's answering that question? That's governance and process, right? And, escalation is somewhat of the tricky one, right? Because we have a boss, we escalate to that person. Okay.
Yep.
But really, could you tie that to a risk matrix that's been established, that tolerances are set on financial, operational, strategic, right? Regulatory. And now, right, and then, low, medium, high, okay, those are now criteria for escalation. On risk, if something falls out of a tolerance, hey, send it to this person. They need to know, the decision maker is here, but we need to inform this group. Or if it's a higher risk, the decision maker is here. We need to inform this group higher. And that's, part of the programmatic piece.
This has been awesome, Brent. I mean, it's, I've been a fan of your work since the beginning with ESRM, the textbooks that created the approach that we're taking, that we talk about a lot on the podcast. And now I think this has just taken things to the next maturation point. This is where now, as you become more engaged as a security professional and you recognize the role you really play within an organization, this is the book now to start reading, right? Because you're right. I could take cyber out of this and create the security risk management program or continue with the risk management program. But it applies to us in the cyberspace, and it gives us something that we all should be looking toward. And I think I'm hoping that's where you wanted to go with this, is now it's a path forward for that next 1, 3, 5 years for all of us to start looking at. And I just wanted to thank you for running it. It was awesome. And having you on the show, thank you for that. This has been great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time here. You don't make money writing books. That does not happen.
Yeah, sadly, we don't on podcasts either. We're
I still seek out these conversations all the time because you just learn, and it's great. It's so fun.
No, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you guys. I enjoyed this conversation.
You betcha. Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.